Ruthie Robinson kneels in the oil-stained gravel of a flickering gas station, clutching 2 aspirin and a bottle of water bought with her last $4, money her daughter needs to eat tomorrow. Beneath her hands, a giant in leather and tattoos gasps for his final breath while a voice from the shadows sneers. Don't get involved. Ruthie has a split second to make a choice. Keep the money and let a man die, or give everything she has and hope for a miracle she doesn't think is coming. Welcome to Mr. Bryan's Tale, where every story takes you on an unforgettable journey. Whether it's thrilling adventures, heartwarming moments, or tales that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, this is your destination for captivating storytelling. If you love getting lost in exciting narratives and discovering new worlds with every video, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss out on the next amazing tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The 5 a.m. alarm didn't just wake Ruthie Robinson. It rattled her bones, a persistent, metallic reminder that her day was starting at a deficit. She moved through the dim shadows of her small apartment with the practiced silence of a woman who had mastered the art of not being noticed. In the kitchen, the fluorescent light flickered twice before revealing the stark reality of the pantry. Ruthie pulled open a cabinet door, the hinge groaning in the quiet morning. Inside, a solitary box of generic toasted oats sat like a relic. She shook it, listening to the hollow rattle of the few remaining flakes. There was just enough for Faith, never enough for both of them. She poured the last of the milk into her daughter's bowl, watching the white liquid barely coat the bottom. For herself, Ruthie settled for a glass of tap water, swallowing the hunger pangs that had become her constant, gnawing companions. By 6:30 a.m., she was at the Sudsy Dreams laundromat, the air thick with the scent of cheap detergent and the humid weight of industrial dryers. Ruthie's back ached as she hauled heavy bags of linen, her hands red and raw from the heat. Every cycle of the machine seemed to hum a countdown. She was $150 short. It was a number that haunted her, a mountain she couldn't climb no matter how many extra shifts she took. Her landlord, a man whose patience had expired months ago, had already taped a yellow notice to her door. 3 days. That was all the time she had before the locks were changed and she and Faith were relegated to a shelter, or worse. Her second shift at the diner offered no reprieve. The lunch rush was a blur of grease and demanding voices. Ruthie moved on feet that felt like lead, the literal holes in the soles of her sneakers rubbing against the linoleum. She counted her tips in the bathroom during her 5-minute break. $12 and change. It wasn't even a dent in the debt. As she walked toward the gas station later that evening to pick up a gallon of milk for the morning, the weight of the world felt physical, a crushing pressure on her chest. She reached into her pocket and felt the crisp edges of her last $5 bill. After the milk, she'd have exactly $4 left, the precise amount needed for Faith's school lunch tomorrow. It was a fragile, desperate balance. Ruthie took a deep breath of the cold night air, trying to find the strength her grandmother always spoke of, unaware that in the flickering light of the gas station pumps, her life of not enough was about to collide with a destiny she never saw coming. The neon sign of the gas station hummed with a sickly buzz, casting long, jittery shadows across the pavement as Ruthie approached the glass doors. She was counting the 4 singles left in her pocket, calculating the exact cost of Faith's milk and bread, when a heavy thud echoed through the quiet night. Near pump number 4, a massive Harley-Davidson leaned precariously on its kickstand, and beside it, a mountain of man in a black leather vest had hit the ground. Sarge lay sprawled on the oil-stained concrete, his face a terrifying shade of ashen gray. His hands, thick and covered in faded ink, clawed desperately at the air near his chest. Ruthie froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't see a Hell's Angel or a threat. She saw a man who was suffocating on his own heartbeat. "Hey! Stay away from him!" A sharp voice barked from the service window. Oscar Krause, the attendant, leaned out, his face twisted in a sneer of pure contempt. "Don't get involved, Ruthie. Those guys are nothing but trouble, probably overdosed or got what was coming to him. I'm not calling 911 for a criminal. Just get your milk and get out before his friends show up." Ruthie looked at Oscar, then down at the man gasping for air. The $4 in her hand felt like a lead weight. If she spent it here, Faith would go to school with an empty stomach. But as Sarge's eyes rolled back, she saw the sheer, human terror in them. The same fear she felt every time she looked at an eviction notice. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted into the store, ignored Oscar's protest, and slammed her last $4 onto the counter. Aspirin and a large water. "Now!" she commanded with a ferocity that silenced the man behind the glass. She scrambled back to the pavement, kneeling in the grit. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice a steady anchor in the dark. She crushed the aspirin, coaxing him to swallow with a sip of water, but his pulse flickered and died beneath her fingertips. The world narrowed down to the rhythm of her own desperation. Ruthie locked her elbows and began chest compressions, the 1, 2, 3, 4 count drowning out the sound of the city. With every thrust, she felt the man's ribs strain beneath her palms. Oscar watched through the window, arms folded, a silhouette of apathy, but Ruthie ignored him. She poured her remaining strength into the giant's chest, refusing to let him slip away in a place so cold and lonely. Finally, a ragged, choking gasp broke the silence. Sarge's chest heaved, his lungs fighting for the night air. He was alive. As the distant wail of the siren finally cut through the air, Ruthie stayed on her knees, her hands trembling, holding the hand of the man the world had told her to fear. The sirens grew from a distant hum to a deafening roar, flashing crimson and cobalt lights reflecting off the oil slicks on the pavement. The paramedics swarmed the scene with practiced efficiency, their heavy boots thumping near Ruthie's knees as they took over the rhythm she had started. Sarge was no longer just a dying man. He was a patient, a collection of vitals and oxygen levels. As they hoisted his massive frame onto the gurney, his eyes flickered open for a fleeting second. He couldn't speak to the oxygen mask, but he reached out a trembling, tattooed hand and pressed a small piece of cardstock into Ruthie's palm. His grip was surprisingly firm, a silent anchor before the ambulance doors hissed shut and the vehicle screamed away into the night. Ruthie stood alone in the sudden, ringing silence of the gas station lot. Her knees were stained with grease, and her hands still hummed with the phantom vibration of compressions she had performed. Behind the safety of the glass, Oscar Kraus watched her with a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. He didn't offer a word of comfort or a ride home. He simply turned off the exterior lights, plunging the pumps into a ghostly twilight. She looked down at her open hand. The $4 was gone, replaced by a thick, midnight black business card with a single word embossed in silver foil. Sarge. There was a phone number and an address on the back, but no company name, no title, no explanation. It felt heavy, far heavier than the paper should have been. The walk home felt miles longer than usual. Every step in her worn-out sneakers was a reminder of what she had surrendered. She stopped at a different convenience store on the corner of her block, hoping for a miracle, but the reality was unyielding. She dug into her pocket and pulled out the remnants of her life, a handful of copper and silver, $1.50. It wasn't enough for the milk, let alone the bread for Faith's lunch. She eventually left the store with a single, small bag of generic crackers, the plastic crinkling in the wind. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, the yellow eviction notice on her door seemed to glow in the hallway light, mocking her. She had saved a life, but as she looked at the crumbs in the bag and the mysterious card in her hand, she couldn't help but wonder if she had finally sacrificed too much. She crawled into bed beside a sleeping Faith, the girl's steady breathing the only music in the quiet room, while Ruthie stared at the ceiling, wondering how she would explain the empty lunchbox in the morning. The sun rose with a mocking brightness, spilling across the kitchen table where Faith sat, dutifully crunching on the dry crackers Ruthie had bought with her last coins. There was no milk, no warmth, and certainly no cereal. Faith didn't complain. She was a child of the struggle, and she knew the silence of an empty fridge well. But every sharp snap of a cracker felt like a strike against Ruthie's heart. She sipped a glass of lukewarm water, the black business card from Sarge sitting on the table between them like a dormant explosive. By the time Ruthie stepped onto the sidewalk to walk Faith to the bus stop, the air in the neighborhood had already soured. News traveled fast in the place where people watched from behind curtains. As she returned from the bus stop alone, she was intercepted by Mrs. Johnson and a small huddle of neighbors near the apartment steps. Mrs. Johnson, usually the first to offer prayer, looked at Ruthie with eyes narrowed in judgment and fear. "We heard what you did at the station, Ruthie," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice low and tight. "You've brought a shadow onto this street. You think those people are going to thank you? Men like that don't want witnesses to their weakness." "He was dying, Mrs. Johnson," Ruthie replied, her voice trembling but firm. "I did what anyone would do." "No, Ruthie," a younger man from the third floor chimed in, crossing his arms. "You did what a fool does. You touched a Hell's Angel. You saw his face when he was down. To people like that, kindness is just a debt they don't want to pay. They don't come back with flowers. They come back for blood, to make sure no one talks about seeing them on the ground." The warning hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Ruthie looked at their faces. Faces of people she had shared sugar with, people who knew her struggle, and saw only a wall of prejudice. They didn't see a life saved. They saw a threat invited to their doorstep. "I have enough to worry about with my rent," Ruthie said, stepping past them. "I'm not looking for thanks, and I'm not looking for a fight." "Well, you better hope the fight doesn't find us all," Mrs. Johnson called after her. Back inside her apartment, Ruthie leaned against the door, the yellow eviction notice rustling against the wood. She looked at the card again. The address was in a part of the city people like her were told to avoid. Her stomach twisted with a new kind of hunger, the hunger for safety. She had spent her last $4 on a man everyone called a monster, and now, according to her neighbors, she had traded her daughter's breakfast for a target on their backs. She tucked the card into her shoe, the only place she felt it was safe, and prepared for another double shift, unaware that the blood the neighborhood feared was actually the lifeblood of a miracle. The bus ride to the address on the card took Ruthie through parts of the city she usually avoided, industrial zones where the streetlights were fewer and the shadows deeper. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, the black card tucked into her palm like a shield or a target. She expected a fortress of rusted metal and barbed wire, a place that smelled of stale beer and gasoline. She expected to be turned away, or worse, to find that her neighbors' warnings about the debt they don't want to pay were true. When she finally stood before the massive brick warehouse, her breath caught. There was no graffiti, no trash. Instead, a fleet of polished chrome motorcycles stood in perfect, gleaming rows under high-intensity security lights. The heavy steel door hummed as she approached, and before she could even knock, it swung open. Ruthie stepped inside and stopped dead. The interior wasn't a thug's den at all. It was a vast, open-plan sanctuary of polished concrete and exposed brick, humming with the quiet energy of a high-end corporate office mixed with a high-tech workshop. Large screens on the walls displayed logistics maps and community outreach data. But it was the people that paralyzed her. Dozens of men and women, all clad in leather vests and heavy boots, were scattered throughout the room. Some were typing at computers. Others were organizing crates of supplies. As the door hissed shut behind Ruthie, the ambient noise, the clicking of keys, the low murmur of conversation stopped instantly. The silence was absolute. Ruthie instinctively pulled her thin coat tighter around her, bracing for a confrontation. But then, the biker closest to the door, a man with a beard down to his chest and arms like tree trunks, pushed back his chair and stood up. Then the woman next to him stood. One by one, across the entire floor, every single person in the room rose to their feet. There were no shouts, no intimidating glares. Instead, they stood in a formation of silent, profound reverence. They looked at her not as an intruder, but as a hero who had returned from a battlefield. They all understood. The man with the beard bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect so deep it brought tears to Ruthie's eyes. "She's here," a voice whispered from the back, and the crowd parted like a dark sea. At the far end of the hall, a heavy timber door opened and a familiar, towering figure stepped out. Sarge was pale and he moved with a slight hitch, but his eyes were clear. He didn't say a word. He simply held out his hand, inviting the woman who had spent her last $4 to save him into a world she never knew existed. Ruthie walked forward, the holes in her shoes finally forgotten as she passed through a corridor of giants standing in her honor. The silence in the room wasn't the cold, empty kind Ruthie was used to in her apartment. It was heavy with profound, collective respect. Sarge sat behind a desk made of reclaimed timber, his massive frame illuminated by the soft amber glow of a desk lamp. He looked different without the oxygen mask, stronger, but his eyes carried a weariness that had nothing to do with his heart attack. He gestured for Ruthie to sit, his tattooed hands resting steadily on the table. "You're wondering why a man like me has a place like this," Sarge began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "Most people see the leather and the ink, and they see a menace. That's what the world saw in my daughter, Lily." He paused, reaching for a framed photograph of a young woman with a smile that mirrored his own. She was a single mom, Ruthie, just like you, working 3 jobs, trying to keep the lights on. She was proud, too proud to ask her old man for help until it was too late. He took a slow, jagged breath. She died in a car wreck 4 years ago, not because she was reckless, but because she was exhausted. She fell asleep at the wheel coming home from a midnight shift because she couldn't afford a mechanic to fix her brakes. She was $200 short of staying safe. Ruthie felt a chill move down her spine. The $150 she owed for rent suddenly felt like the weight of a mountain. "I spent my life being a tough guy," Sarge continued, his gaze piercing to the dim light. "But I realize the toughest people in this world aren't the ones on 2 wheels. It's the mothers who skip meals so their kids can eat crackers for breakfast." After Lily passed, I took my club and the money I'd made in construction, and I turned it into something else. We aren't a gang, Ruthie. We're a shield. He leaned forward, the silver skull on his ring catching the light. We created the Lily Foundation to find the people the system ignores, the ones who are one broken-down car or one missed shift away from losing everything. We call our $1 million mission, not because we're all rich, but because we've raised over $1 million to intervene before the tragedy happens. We look for the heart, Ruthie. And that night at the gas station, when everyone else looked away, you showed me yours. You gave up Faith's lunch money for a man you thought was a criminal. You didn't just save my life. You proved that the world Lily lived in still has heroes. Ruthie looked at the photograph of Lily, then back at Sarge. For the first time in years, the crushing pressure in her chest began to lift, replaced by a terrifying, beautiful spark of hope. Sarge wasn't just a biker. He was a guardian of the overlooked, and he was looking right at her. The morning began with a vibration that Ruthie first mistook for a low-rolling thunderstorm. It started as a faint tremor in her floorboards, rattling the half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. But as the sound deepened, it transformed into a rhythmic, mechanical roar that seemed to swallow the air itself. By the time she reached the window, drawing back the thin curtains, the street below had been overtaken. A river of chrome and black leather was flooding the narrow asphalt of her block. One by one, the motorcycles decelerated, their engines growling like caged beasts before settling into a synchronized idle that made the apartment windows thrum in their frames. There were nearly 100 of them, a disciplined phalanx of riders that stretched from one end of the street to the other. The morning sun glinted off polished handlebars and silver studs, turning the gritty neighborhood street into a canyon of shimmering metal. Inside the surrounding buildings, the neighborhood held its breath. Ruthie saw Mrs. Johnson peering through her blinds, her face pale with the "I told you so" terror of a woman expecting a war. Doors were locked, and parents pulled their children away from the glass. To them, this was the arrival of the darkness they had predicted, the blood they were sure Ruthie had invited by touching a man the world had discarded. Ruthie felt a flicker of that same cold fear until she saw the lead bike. It was a massive, custom-built machine, and the man stepping off it moved with deliberate, steady grace. Sarge removed his helmet, his silver hair catching the light, and looked directly up at Ruthie's window. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a king returning to the person who had saved his crown. He raised a hand, and as if on a silent command, 100 engines were cut simultaneously. The sudden silence was more deafening than the roar. The neighbors began to creep onto their porches, eyes wide as they watched the riders dismount. These weren't men looking for a fight. They were carrying crates, tools, and heavy envelopes. They moved with a military precision, forming a corridor from the street to Ruthie's front door. Ruthie grabbed her sweater and hurried down the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she pushed open the heavy main door, she found Sarge waiting on the landing. The neighborhood jury stood paralyzed on their stoops, watching as a man they called a monster took Ruthie's hand and bowed his head. The thunder had passed, but the storm of change was just beginning to break. Sarge stepped forward, the heavy soles of his boots crunching on the gravel as he reached into the pocket of his worn leather vest. The neighborhood was silent, 100 bikers standing like a wall of granite behind him, their presence turning the dilapidated street into a sanctuary. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope and a set of silver keys that caught the morning light, dancing with a brilliance Ruthie hadn't seen in years. "Ruthie," Sarge's voice was thick, a low rumble that carried the weight of a debt finally being paid. "A few nights ago, you spent your last $4 to keep a stranger's heart beating. You didn't ask for a name, and you didn't look for a reward. You just saw a human being in trouble." He handed her the envelope, his callous hand steady against her trembling fingers. "This is from the Lilly Foundation. It's $25,000. It's not a loan, and it's not a handout. It's the safety net you should have had a long time ago." Ruthie's breath hitched, her eyes blurring as she looked at the check inside. It was more than 2 years of her salary at the laundromat, a life-altering sum that wiped away the $150 deficit and the yellow eviction notice in a single stroke. But Sarge wasn't finished. He held up the keys, the metal cool as he pressed them into her palm. "That house you're in, it's owned by a slumlord who doesn't care if the roof leaks on your daughter. Well, we bought the deed to the small brick house 3 blocks over. My brothers and I spent the last 48 hours gutting it, fixing the plumbing and filling the pantry. It's yours, Ruthie, fully renovated and fully paid for. Faith will have a backyard to play in this afternoon." Ruthie felt the world tilting, the crushing weight of poverty finally snapping under the pressure of such immense grace. She tried to find the words to thank him, but her throat was tight with a decade of unshed tears. "There's one more thing," Sarge added, his expression softening into a rare, genuine smile. "I need someone who knows what it means to look at a person and see their worth, not their bank account. I want you to come work for me as the executive outreach coordinator for the foundation. It's a $52,000 a year salary, full benefits, and a seat at my table. I don't want you folding other people's clothes anymore, Ruthie. I want you helping me find the next person who needs a miracle." As the bikers behind him began to clap, a thunderous, rhythmic sound that replaced the fear on the street with a sense of triumph, Ruthie looked at the keys and the check. The $4 she had sacrificed at the gas station had returned to her as a $1 million life, a testament to the fact that when you give everything you have, the universe sometimes finds a way to give it all back, and then some. 6 months later, the morning air was crisp as Ruthie Robinson stood on the freshly painted porch of the Robinson Center. The old, derelict building she had once walked past in despair had been transformed into a vibrant hub of activity, its red bricks scrubbed clean and its windows gleaming in the early sun. She wasn't wearing worn-out sneakers today. Her stride was confident, and her heart no longer felt like a hollow weight in her chest. Inside, the center was a hive of life. In one room, local mothers sat in a job-training seminar, their faces lit with the same flicker of hope Ruthie had felt that first day in Sarge's sanctuary. In another, a small library was filled with children, including Faith, who was no longer the girl eating crackers in the dark, but a vibrant child who saw a world of possibilities instead of a world of limits. Ruthie moved through the halls with a purpose that transcended a paycheck. Every person she passed was someone the world had tried to overlook, and every resource the center provided was a shield against the tragedy of not enough. Sarge often stopped by, his motorcycle a familiar, comforting growl in the parking lot. He didn't come as a benefactor anymore, but as a partner. They had built a bridge between a community that felt forgotten and a group of people who'd been unfairly judged. The Robinson Center was a living proof of their pact, a place where a single act of mercy had expanded into $1 million of hope. As the afternoon sun began to set, Ruthie stepped out to the sidewalk and saw a young woman standing near the entrance, looking at the sign with a mixture of longing and hesitation. She was clutching a small, frayed purse, her eyes tired and her shoulders hunched under the weight of an invisible burden. Ruthie recognized that look instantly. It was the look of a woman who was down to her last few dollars and 1,000 silent prayers. Ruthie didn't wait for her to ask for help. She walked down the steps extending her hand just as Sarge had done for her. She thought back to that oil-stained gas station, to the $4 she had been so afraid to lose, and realized it was the best investment she had ever made. "Come on in," Ruthie said with a warm, steady smile. "You're in the right place. We've been waiting for you." The woman's shoulders relaxed just an inch as she took Ruthie's hand. In that moment, the cycle of kindness completed another turn. Ruthie had learned that while poverty can break a spirit, a single spark of humanity can rebuild a world. She was no longer just a survivor of the struggle. She was the architect of its end, proving once and for all that the smallest gift, given at the right time, can change a life forever.
Ruthie Robinson's journey began with a single, desperate choice at a flickering gas station. She could have listened to the voices of fear. She could have kept her last $4 and walked away. But she chose to see a human being instead of a stereotype, and that one act of mercy sparked a revolution of kindness that transformed an entire neighborhood. Today, the Robinson Center stands as a testament to the fact that no one is ever too poor to give, and no one is ever too lost to be saved. It reminds us that behind every leather vest, every tattered coat, and every closed door, there is a story waiting for a hero to step in. If Ruthie's courage moved you today, don't let the inspiration stop here. There is always someone in your world waiting for their own $4 miracle. If you enjoyed the story, please hit the like button and subscribe to Mr. Brian's Tale. By subscribing, you help us share more stories of hope, redemption, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Tell us in the comments, have you ever helped a stranger against all odds? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for watching Mr. Brian's Tale. Now, go out and be the light in someone else's dark day. We'll see you in the next story.